And my name is Cheryl Chapman, and I am an instructional designer with the CBC OEI at One Group. And I also teach at Coastline College part-time for the last 25 years or so. And I'm so excited to have my colleague Oceana from Coastline for our webinar today. We have the chat enabled. You're all entering muted, and I'll keep track of any microphones that bleep. But when there's question time, feel free to raise your hand, unmute, and then we won't talk over each other. So I'm going to let Oceana introduce herself, and welcome everyone.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I know this is a busy time of the semester for everybody. Please take a moment to post to the chat. I'd love to hear just a teacher that was impactful in your life and why. It can be from any age or level. So just take a moment to post that in the chat as people are just kind of getting settled. And then while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Oceana Callum. I've been teaching at Coastline College for about, 4.5 years now. And so I taught as a part-time English instructor in the Coast District for about 15 years before becoming full-time at Coastline. And I also have started a literary magazine at Coastline called Storyline, and we just finished up an essay contest that I began. So those are some of my fun projects when I'm not grading papers. So if you take a look at the chat, you're seeing some really wonderful things here. I put about mine that Miss Ballard, my high school English teacher, she shocked me one day by reading my writing aloud to the class, but it made me sort of hear it anew and made it feel special. And so made me think that writing that I had done was special. It made me look at it in a new way. You have some other people talking about professors who gave points for reading any book, professors who saw someone who truly saw me, one of you wrote, and helped me discover who I was as a writer. He helped me envision what part writing could play for me in my life. And then someone else said that the teacher made me feel as if my words are valuable, allowed me to explore my voice and experience. English professor who was in command of the subject and presented it so well. Excellent. So I just wanted to play you a little clip. I was just telling Cheryl that I had the opportunity to go to South by Southwest EDU in March in Austin, and we got to hear a keynote with Baratunde Thurston, who wrote the best-selling book, How to Be Black. This is just literally a 1.5 minute clip of him answering the same question. So just bear with me while I turn my headphones off for a second.
Let me know if you can't hear it once it starts. And I was curious, Baratunde, if you would share or honor two teachers in your life who have deeply shaped you, your work, your lens on why you do what you do.
Yeah, I'm real happy to do that. One teacher is my high school English teacher. Her name is Erica Berry, and she related to us in a really comfortable way. You know, high school students, we can be the worst humans in the world. You know, the insecurities come out in all kinds of unfortunate directions, and we talk a lot of BS, and she talked it right back, not crossing the line, but letting us know that, like, she could play too. I still remember some Middle English phrases from Beowulf because of her.
Let's hear it.
Wait, we gardena en ger dagum off shield chafing sheatena triatum. That's Erica Berry. I don't know why I know that, but I can still drop that.
You don't know the impact you're having.
Middle English lives.
Exactly.
And she's the reason I majored in philosophy when I went to college, because she just encouraged me to try it. And it ended up becoming more of a passion during those times. What stood out to me, I didn't think about till later about her, though, is that she was a Spanish teacher for a very, very long time. We were the first year that she taught English. And I think she kind of showed us through example that you can change, you can pick up a new skill and still be effective. So I really have a lot of respect, not just for the grammar and the Middle English, but for the behavior that she modeled, and so the evolution that she modeled. And then the other teacher is kind of from the other end of the spectrum. My good friend has 2 children.
Okay, let me just connect back to my headphones here so you don't have to hear screeching.
Video there. I don't know why it wouldn't share the video, but at least you got to hear a little bit about, I think a lot of times when people do this exercise, they talk about things that their teachers did or ways that they impacted them that had nothing to do with the subject matter at all. So he talks about how by example, she showed that you can kind of shift careers or shift your focus of your career, and then that's an okay thing to do. So that's kind of where I wanted to start today. And then I just say, I'd love to hear from you at the end with questions and especially with ideas that you have. So if you just save those up until the end. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and this time hopefully I'll have better luck with my slides. Okay, so just as a reminder, we're calling this talk Addressing the Affective Domain in Online Learning, Strategies for a Post-AB705 Freshman Composition. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about AB705. It's a controversial legislation that now colleges are kind of doing some gymnastics to adapt to. But what we do know, right, is that in our freshman composition classes, that we have a lot of students who in the past would have been deemed quote unquote unprepared. And what the research shows is that the layers of remedial classes were actually putting them at a disadvantage. But so what do these students need when they appear in our classes? And what actually, do all of our students need? And so that's kind of what we're talking about today. So I have just a little agenda. We're not, I don't have a million slides for you. We'll talk about polling. So these are going to be all some strategies that you can try out in your classrooms, and some of them may be things that you already do. And again, I'm going to actively solicit ideas from you at the end. So we're going to talk about polling. We're going to talk about discussion prompts. We're going to talk about course syllabus and course policies, and then we'll talk about assignment comments before I crowdsource from you. So that's kind of where we're headed today. And so when we talk about polling, we obviously already did this post in the chat. This can actually be a really powerful tool to ask your students about their past experiences with education, because you don't always hear good stuff, and that's useful information too. If the student is coming to you with a really fresh experience with a professor that wasn't good, right? That's something that will help you understand their behavior. And so all of that little activities and questions I'll ask are things that you can do with your students. But first, let's just talk about this highfalutin phrase, the affective domain, because that's something that's being thrown around a lot. What is the affective domain? And so there's this visual here that we can use to kind of help us, that values, motivation, attitudes, stereotypes, and feelings are all part of the affective domain. And what I like to do to boil that down to kind of plain English is really just to say, addressing the affective domain is treating students like whole human beings with cultures, families, pasts, goals, personalities, experiences, limitations, and emotions. And so if we're ignoring this, right, if we're saying that's not relevant to marine biology or literature, whatever we're teaching, then we're really missing out on a whole area that we have to reach students and help them do better in our classes. And I'm not so good at keeping an eye on the chat while I'm talking, but Cheryl, I trust you'll let me know if anyone had something pressing that comes up while I'm talking. Okay, great. So all the activities we do today are also meant to be done with your students. And I really do think of teaching as a collaborative activity. A lot of the ideas that I'm sharing are not my own original ideas, and I'll do my best to give credit to them, as to the originators as they come up. This first one is from a colleague of mine, Stephanie Bridges, who was one of the people who helped me start learning about acceleration, that concept that students could really just place right into freshman composition with support and to pass that transfer level class in the first year. So this is what I'm calling the magic question. And she said she actually got it from a conference. She can't remember which one. So try asking your student this magic question on the first day or week of class. What is one thing that you wish your professors knew about you? When I first heard this question, I thought, so what? It's like one of those questions you ask students on the first day, like, what's your major? But for some reason, this question really unlocks something special. So why is it a magic question? It's a magic question because it opens the door for students to unburden themselves about obstacles to succeeding in your class that they might be facing. And I think allowing them to talk about their anxiety about the class can really help dispel the anxiety. So throughout this presentation, I have some student responses that I think sometimes are the most powerful evidence of for example, why this is a magic question. So here we have a student who says, one important thing I would like my professors to know about me is that I live with chronic illness. This means that some days are worse than others, but I will make sure to put my all into completing everything on time. I think communication is important, and I hope this knowledge will help build a good relationship with my professors. I see quite a few challenges for this semester as I'm taking math and struggle with it. So for those of us that used to teach on-site classes and now are completely online, that might be a student that in the past we could visually see that they were struggling, right? This chronic illness. And now the only way for us to know about this obstacle is for them to feel comfortable telling us about it, right? Another student said, one thing I wish my teachers knew about me is that I used to only do school because I had to, so I could play sports. But with no sports anymore, I'm doing school for me. I can be a little slow sometimes, but I'm trying. And that kind of hints again at something that we'll talk about in a couple slides about how students feel that professors are quick to judge them as lazy when they do something like not turn in an assignment. Another student said, one thing I want my professors to know about me is that I actually really care about my schoolwork. Sometimes I can get so overwhelmed I don't know where to start. And then finally, one thing I wish a professor knew about me is that I'm quite prone to making mistakes. I have in the past closed out of a test by accident or missed a deadline by a minute or two. I've been fortunate with my time in college, as most of my professors have been understanding and helped me remedy these situations. But I have had a couple more difficult professors be a bit more strict regarding assignments. Overall, I'm never malicious when I make these mistakes. I'm just scatterbrained. And so just a show of hands really quick, I'll stop sharing for a second. I just love for you to raise your hand or your virtual hand if you've ever made a mistake at your job or a past job and had to ask your supervisor or your boss for leniency or for an extension or something like that. I know I certainly have. So I think that also just reminds us of that fact. Let's see, where did I go here? Okay. Okay, so I want to go now to discussion prompts. I won't ask you to post in the chat for all of these. So this one takes some thought, right? So you don't have to post this one in the chat. But this is something I invite you to try with your students if you've never done it before, and that is to ask them to reflect about a time that they were misperceived. So this is what the prompt to students looks like. Describe an experience in which you were misperceived. Perhaps someone made a snap judgment, stereotype, or assumption about you, or perhaps you were the one doing the misjudging. And so this can be a really powerful assignment. It is in response to a really old essay that's still an amazingly relevant essay. I'm going to put the link in the chat for you. So just give me a second. But this is, just raise your hand if you've read the essay before called Just Walk On By, Black Men in Public Space by Brent Staples. Is anyone familiar with that work? Okay, so I'll go ahead and link it in the chat. It's been a while since I juggled the many windows of a Zoom room. Here we go. It's right here. Okay. Oh, I think I just sent it to you, Cheryl. Can you repost it for me? Okay, great. So it's in the chat. Here, let me see if I can do it to everyone. Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you, Cheryl. So that's a PDF. It's a really short essay and it's a great one for students in freshman comp. And essentially, as you might guess, it's about a very educated Black man, Brent Staples himself, who's walking around Chicago and essentially getting profiled everywhere he goes, from being, chased out of his workplace because someone doesn't recognize him, to a woman literally running away from him, clutching her purse. And so it's kind of the quintessential misperception situation. And so the students read this essay first before we do this discussion. And then they're responding, but they're responding about any sort of misperception from any sort of situation. So some of them do want to talk about race or ethnicity. Some of them do want to talk about gender or sexual orientation, but a lot of them want to talk about assumptions that people make because of their age, because of their tattoos, because of their socioeconomic class, where they live, the car they drive, especially in Southern California, right? The car you drive is supposed to say a lot about you. And then sometimes even coincidence or sheer accident. And so this takes the pressure off in terms of, students who say, well, I don't get this, people don't misjudge me very often, and they can usually think of something. And it also gives the space for students who have had these really powerful experiences to talk about what they're bringing to the table in terms of, how people react to them based on this quality about themselves. And then this is Brent Staples right here. So I have students do a longer post for this. It's a 250-word discussion post. And then I have them analyze, why you believe the misperception occurred, was it meaningful or not, and why, and does it tell us anything interesting about human nature, why or why not? Does anyone have, it occurs to me with these discussion prompts, does anyone have any questions in particular to this? I can't see hands, so I'll rely on Cheryl. If someone has their hand up, let me know.
Not yet.
Okay, so this is a sample student response. And again, I just wanted to show this because of the complexity sometimes of, why the students feel they were misjudged. I'm going to read this in its entirety just because I think it's a powerful example of a student who's really coming into the classroom with a lot of baggage that they're going to have to work through in order to assume that I'm going to treat them with respect. So it says, hello class. A time I was misperceived or misjudged was because of a situation I was in. I have two older sisters, and because of that, when I was in high school, I often got the same classes or teachers that my sisters once had. Well, my oldest sister had a rough time with one of the teachers. The teacher told my sister she plagiarized on an essay but had no proof and said she would give no credit to my sister. This made my sister mad, and she spoke up against the teacher, who then started treating her poorly. My sister then quit her class. A couple years passed, and I went into high school and unfortunately got the same class and teacher my sister had. This teacher absolutely hated me from day one. She was always calling me out and accusing me of things I never did. She brought up my sister's actions on occasion and talked poorly of her, which was very wrong. I could never ask for help or any direction on my work because she would simply tell me I need to pay attention better and not act stupid. Other students noticed her extreme hate for me and would try and help me out when they could. I was a very well-behaved kid, and so it surprised everyone when I would get sent to the office or get detention from her class. This teacher judged me and thought I was a bad kid because of the actions of my sister. She never gave me a chance or helped, but instead she assumed I was being disrespectful and bad because my sister had a bad experience with her. This experience taught me that some people will make assumptions about you based on what they think or what has happened in the past. It also was meaningful because it helped me to understand that it's important to give everyone a chance, no matter what you think you know about them. Thanks for reading. So again, a lot of times students, that particular post to me seemed like it was just waiting to come out, right? To kind of unburden themselves about this past bad experience that's kind of standing in their way of looking at our classroom in a positive light. Feel free to put questions in the chat as well about these particular discussion prompts. This next one is called Does Student Laziness Exist? And so I'm going to put another link in the chat for you. And this is an essay that was quite famous that I discovered at a California Acceleration Project conference. And what became so famous that the author, Devin Price, wrote a book of the same title, which was very recently published. But you can still read the essay itself for free. It's called Laziness Does Not Exist. Here it is in the chat. I did it to everyone this time. Students really respond to this essay. I mean, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was provocative, and it was going to definitely, have people really feel strongly one way or another. But it really never ceases to amaze me how strongly students feel about this essay, which essentially posits that student laziness is always what we perceive as laziness, if we do perceive it as such, is almost always a mask for something going on with the student that is anything from mental illness to a learning disability to a huge burden in their personal life. So after they read the essay, then, and this is, I apologize if this is hard to see, but it's sort of like a 3-part prompt. After they read the article, they find a particularly provocative quote from the article, and they write a post of at least 150 words in which they agree or disagree with the quote or some combination of the two. And then as an option, I also say you can explore this idea. If laziness truly does not exist, what ramifications does this have for our careers and our personal and academic lives? And if you choose this approach, use a quote from Price's article. So this discussion, along with critical thinking and addressing the affective domain, right? This like baggage that students bring to the classroom, it also aims to explicitly include neurodiverse and transgender students in the conversation. And that's because Price talks a bit in the essay about how they are transgender, that they use they, them, their pronouns, which gives the students a chance to practice using those pronouns when they write about the essay, etc. And about neurodiversity, Price themselves is also autistic. So any questions about that one or thoughts? Okay, we're moving on to another longer example. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Hold on. Let me
That was just someone new coming in.
Okay, no problem. So this is a student response. And again, this is a bit long, but I think it's worth just kind of noting how students respond to this piece. And also I don't tend to talk for a really long time, so you don't have to worry about, I'll be very respectful of your time. In Devin Price's article, Laziness Does Not Exist, they explain, and when you don't fully understand a person's context, what it feels like to be them every day, all the small annoyances and major traumas that define their life, it's easy to impose abstract, rigid expectations on a person's behavior. I have to agree with Price, since this has often been my experience in the world. People are often unaware of the physical pain I suffer every day. It's a lot to deal with when you combine it with the fatigue it causes, the annoyances of sensory processing disorder, and the difficulty of understanding social situations that are nearly impossible on a good day. Autism spectrum disorder is mostly invisible to most people, and sensory processing issues are still not fully understood by many professionals. It's hard for others to understand that the trauma caused by yelling at me for using food or forgetting to clean something means that I'm going to avoid being yelled at by merely not doing those things in the future. And I'll skip down. People judge others based on appearances and some background information they may or may not have. In the disability community, we see people judging others like this all the time, whether it's the minor annoyance of an assistive technology failing to load or flashbacks causing me to freeze in place. My behavior can seem downright puzzling to the people that don't know me, causing me to appear very lazy indeed. So I'm going to switch gears and talk a bit about the syllabus and course policies. And I just love, again, to see a show of hands of how many of you are English teachers. If you're an English teacher, if you could raise your hand. Okay, so just a handful of you. In English, and I mean, what we're talking about hopefully applies to all disciplines, but in English, we teach our students a lot to think about purpose and audience. Like, what is the purpose of this piece of writing and who is my audience? And I was kind of taken aback in going through the tenure evaluation process when someone on my tenure committee asked me, you know, what's the purpose and audience of your syllabus? I said, it's students, obviously, and it's to tell them, you know, what to do or like how to act in class, how to behave, right? But as she helped me to see, you know, there's a whole movement, and some of you may be even more familiar with this than I am, of the syllabus as this document that actually can do so much more than just being an informative document. So questions to ask yourself: what is the purpose of my syllabus? And is my syllabus welcoming? Because mine certainly over the years has evolved, but I would say when I first started teaching, my syllabus was not welcoming. It was, when I first started teaching, I was 24. I was hard to tell apart from my students. And I felt like it was really important for me to establish this role of authority because I was going to get walked all over, right? That's just sort of this fear that my training program instilled in me. But what is the purpose of it? And is it welcoming? I think welcomizing your syllabus is something that you can do that really just shifts the whole dynamic, right? Instead of being an informational document, could your syllabus be a persuasive document? And if you think of it as a persuasive document, who is your audience and of what do they need to be persuaded, right? What do they need to be persuaded to feel, think, and do, right, in order for this to be a really wonderful experience in your classroom? And you can ask yourself the same thing about your course policies, right? What is the purpose of my course policies? And I think that's shifted for me as well over the years, whereas the course policies in the past, maybe in my mind, were to create order, right? Over the years have shifted to be something that, you know, yes, provides structure, but also communicates that I respect my students, that I respect their schedules, and that I respect the fact that they have a lot of obligations. So do my course policies inspire confidence or fear might be another question. And consider flexing your policies. So many of us already have flexible due dates, but if not, right, maybe asking yourself, what is my fear about introducing a flexible due date? I know my fear was, oh, students are just going to be taking advantage of that. And my experience is they really don't. I have a 3-day window that I allow them to turn in essays. And my experience is that most students actually turn it in on the first day that it's due. But you know, they love having that extra time. And this is something that we could all think about together, which is, what is a course policy that you have that could become even more flexible, even if it's already flexible? So one thing, an example in my own classes that I haven't instituted yet, but I've been thinking about is, what would it look like for students to choose their own due date for something? Now, I haven't gotten as far in my mind of, you know, everything, not all assignments, but could there be one big essay, for example, where they could choose their own due date, and what would that look like, right? So kind of shifting into that mindset. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was assignment feedback. And this is, again, an area that a lot of us do actively try and humanize our feedback by doing things like addressing students by name. Video feedback is shown to create psychological togetherness. Now, if you're like me, I'm only going to do video feedback if I'm having a good hair day. So a lot of times I do audio feedback, and that, you know, that I think accomplishes a bit of the same thing. I wanted to just play an audio comment that, just a sample audio comment that I give in Canvas, and I can show you that. I know a lot of us use Canvas.
So this is just a comment in a response to a student essay. So I use my tablet, my iPad, to write on the student's essay, give feedback in the margins, and then do an audio comment.
Hi Ronnie, it's Professor C coming to you with some feedback on Essay 1. This was a really intriguing and strong essay in so many ways. You have a strong thesis statement, although I think you could foreground it even more by putting it at the very end of your first paragraph. And I'm so impressed by how detailed and thoughtful you are about analyzing specific details from the song, things like metaphor and what the lyrics actually mean in terms of messages about peace and harmony, and encouraging people to stop war and oppression because it's the role of every man rather than just the government. So I thought those were all really strong elements of the essay. The essay is often quite well written and articulate, even eloquent, so see the check marks for those places. But it's also kind of uneven, the writing, in terms of there are also other places where the phrasing is confusing or there are lots of grammar errors that get in the way. So looking for careful editing and proofreading in your next essays. You do a great job with your intro strategy, but now I'd like you to work on a conclusion technique using some of the strategies addressed in a recent course announcement, or it may be coming up this week. I'll have to check. So let me know if you have any questions about all of this, and I look forward to seeing your writing continue to develop. Nice job here.
That's something similar to what a lot of people do. Again, I like to do video better, but it depends on what I'm doing that day. And let's go back to the slides here. So some of the things that I think, you know, a lot of people do, but we always can use more tools in our arsenal besides addressing students by name, using video or audio feedback, going into detail about what students do well. I think as, you know, as professionals, we don't always know what we're doing well. I mean, think about the last time that a colleague really praised you in detail for something specific. I don't think that's something that we automatically know about ourselves. Give readerly responses whenever possible alongside teacherly ones. I don't think the example I played was a particularly good example of that, but what I mean here is alongside, you know, you did this well, this could use improvement. How about, that's a really interesting idea, or I'm confused here, or you know, that's an interesting concept that I've never heard of before. So even just responding to the ideas rather than the execution can really go a long way toward communicating that respect. And then quoting students' words back to them. Again, circling back to that, you know, experience I had with Miss Ballard in high school, that students aren't always aware when they're being incredibly eloquent and brilliant, and they need to kind of have that reflected back to them. So I'd love to hear from you at this point, and I'll just give you the option to, let's see.
So far, there was just one comment by Kim
Okay.
about the audio. And she said, you know, as we know about the accessibility, and Shannon said if you use Canvas Studio, it will create captions for you that you can edit. And there are also, well, Coastline, we have Panopto, which would help also. So do you have any experience with that, Oceana?
I do. That's actually a really great question. And it's also a question that I had when I first started doing it, because at Coastline, we're really concerned about accessibility. So what you want to do, or what I do, is to communicate with students when you're first going to give this feedback. This is how I'm planning on giving you feedback. Please let me know if you prefer an alternate method. Because it's an individual piece of feedback, it does not have to be captioned, but of course, if the student wants it, a caption and they prefer video or audio, that is absolutely what you should do. But my only experience with this is a couple times students would say I prefer written comments, and then I'm happy to write comments. So it's kind of just about communicating with your students and making sure that, you know, the video or audio feedback is okay with them. And that is, from my understanding, it complies with accessibility requirements, because you're not putting something out to the class as a whole. It's an individual interaction.
Absolutely.
Great question.
And then Kim also asked, does this work in the grade book?
Yes. So my understanding is when you're the student and you click and you're looking at the page that you see your grade, you're going to see something that says view feedback. And that's where you'll hear the comments, and then you'll also view the essay with the assignment with the writing on it. So
I'm sorry,
let
me pop in really quickly.
Yes.
I was wondering if Canvas Studio works in Gradebook.
Canvas Studio, that would probably be a question for Cheryl, because everything that I'm using is just the Canvas speed grader.
So Kim, the tools that are in the comment section are built into Canvas, and it's just audio and video. But if you used Canvas Studio, you'd have to create the video in Canvas and then put the link in the grade section.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to double check. Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? I actually have a Google Doc that I thought we could, if people want to share things that they do and kind of create this like living document. Let me see if I can find it for you real quick. Let's see, here it is. I'm going to put this in the chat so that people can either speak up, and I'd love to hear things that you do in your classroom that kind of address the whole person, or you can put them in the Google Doc. Here we go. And in the Google Doc, it's editable, so you would just add whatever you want to add, and then after everyone's done adding, you can download it and save it for future reference. So feel free to hop on there if you'd rather just put something down that you do. But would anyone like to share orally or verbally anything that they do in their class? Yes, Gregory.
Yes. Well, I don't teach English composition. I teach history, and so I find polling very important because I have to know who the background of my students are. My preferred testing method is by essay. That was my experience going through school. So I know what they're going to face if they transfer to another school later on, that they're going to have to know how to write an essay exam. The biggest complaint I have from the students is we've never had English composition yet. And I'd like to say, well, what happened in high school? But I don't do that. But I think, geez, here I am finding myself having to kind of do a little bit of what we were talking about now in a history formation, in a history class. And from that history perspective, talking about, what was the issue, what were the ramifications and so forth, and being able to communicate that in writing. And it creates some challenges because I get students that really, this is the first time they've had to ever really write an essay. And as I said, they didn't have the experience of English 1A or whatever you call it, 100 or whatever it is at your campus. But and that's a real challenge because you have that as well. And by the time the final comes, of course, they get the final back if they want it, but it's still, we don't have a chance to say, well, you did a great job here, you did that, I can write in the margins or something. But, to go over it with it like you can the midterm, you can say, well, let's sit down and look at this. This is what you could have done, this is what I'm looking for, and so forth and so on. So anyway, as I said, it's really a challenge for us who aren't in English comp, and to have to, if we choose to do that. If you don't, you can always give multiple choice questions and things like that. But I prefer to do essays. So
yeah, absolutely. Gregory, do you teach mostly freshmen or higher level, or?
Well, I teach freshmen, sophomores, the first 2 years. And then once in a while, I've done an upper division class at another school. But that's a whole different category. I find that the real challenge is trying to take students who come, they all come from different backgrounds. They all usually show up in community college, either there for economic reasons or they want to get their grades up to get ready to transfer. And so I figure that, that's kind of part of my job. And I usually do not get students who are just there for, technical classes or whatever it is, something that's not academically related. They seem to choose my classes if they have intent to transfer to a 4-year institution. And so I'm, try doggedly to get them ready for that transition. But it's a real challenge. And it's really surprising because of what we've been talking about. It'd really be nice if you could hook up with an English professor and say, listen, could we work together on this? Here's the assignment. And if you could deal with it in your class about how you're going to answer Mr. Capune's questions, et cetera,
And that's really, part of AB705 is the requirement that we support these students who maybe in the past would have been shunted into, 5 levels below freshman comp and then gotten stuck there. But instead, like, what can we do to support these students? So different colleges are going about it in different ways. Our college is trying to start a writing center, which would, for example, would be like a place that you could send your students for help with their essays in any subject, right?
That would be fantastic.
And a lot of community colleges already have writing centers, which I think are, those can be an incredible place for that. But yeah, professors in other disciplines besides English are also going to be seeing that, students need more support.
Yeah, and another thing that I've noticed when we're talking about their time and their, dedication or the time they can commit to the scholastic life is most of a large chunk of my students aren't 18-year-olds who are fresh out of high school and want to, they want to go to college. These are people who a lot of them are older in life who come back and they've got families, they've got jobs, they got other things to do besides take my history class. And I try to be very cognizant of that because, I want to do everything I can to help them through and, be successful at this project they've undertaken. And, but they aren't your typical, I would say they're not your typical UC freshman student who's there for the 4-year haul and has nothing else going on in their life, except school. And so that's a challenge as well, fitting school in.
Another way that, a lot of colleges are addressing AB705 is with corequisites, which is a model that we've tried at Coastline with not that much success, but other colleges are doing it more successfully where, the student will enroll in a section alongside their main course and get support there. And some of the most interesting things that I've seen have been like the pairing of, for example, English with an ESL corequisite. I'm curious if other people hear what your college is doing to kind of support students after AB705, or if you want to ask a different question or talk about something different, that's okay too.
It's the afternoon lull.
It's okay. It's absolutely okay. Yeah, so I think colleges are going about this in many different ways, but absolutely, thinking about ways that we can look at the fact that a student may have had a subpar high school education, and what are we gonna do to support them? So Other questions or, offerings, things that people do in their classes that they'd like to offer up as a way that we address the whole person?
I think that's key of what you said. It's the whole person. And Gregory too, getting to know your student, no matter what the situation, is just helpful, because then you know how to address any issues that come up a little bit better. The English one is, I see and hear it a lot, like I have this writing in my course, but doesn't seem like the resources are there. But maybe also pooling resources from different colleges, right, that are available to, that are public and available to all. The Writing Center sounds like a great idea, though.
Yes, we're just waiting for funding and then hopefully piloting this summer. And again, most colleges, most community colleges have one, just because it's a great way for students to kind of not just get writing support, but connect to the college, and the little bit of research that there is on writing centers says that, it helps students feel like they're connected to the college in a way that, helps them stick around. So,
Gregory, do you have tutoring at your college?
Let me unmute. Yeah, we do, and they can be, we can make referrals and things like that. But to be honest, a lot of those are things that are great ideas. But if the student doesn't want to go and do that, or I'd love to, Mr. Capuni, but I had to get down to the job doing this, or I had that, or whatever. For example, I teach at Pierce College right now, but also I've taught at Oxnard College, and the student body is very different at Oxnard Community College than it is at Pierce. And one thing is that we have a lot of ESL students at Oxnard, a tremendous amount. In fact, I would say disproportionately the student body is female, Spanish speaking, and the nature of what's going on in their lives is very, very different than what's going on at Pierce College, where we really have more of a diverse society, all genders, all ethnic groups, everybody's much more diverse. But the thing is it's trying to, they can come to my class, they can put in the time for my class, but there's no time for anything else. And that's very frustrating, because I can see the potential, and I'd love to say, gosh, guys, if you could just go and do, sir, I'd like to, but I got to be home for whatever. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to take my grandmother to the doctor. I mean, whatever, So.
Dan had an interesting comment in the chat. Dan Barnett said that there's a book about trauma-informed pedagogy coming out in mid-July. That's actually a really hot topic right now too, and something that was covered a lot at the South by Southwest EDU conference, about, addressing, kind of going that extra step to address the fact that not only are our students suffering or burdened in lots of ways, but a lot of them have experienced trauma, significant trauma. I think you teach long enough, you'll end up with a student who shares with you that they are homeless, right? Or that they've undergone, some sort of violence. And so how do we teach in a way that, respects that and accommodates that? So that's great. One of the things I really liked at the conference as well is that they didn't just have lectures, they had roundtables. So the trauma-informed pedagogy roundtable was actually just literally roundtables where teachers of all different levels, and a lot of them were K through 12, would come and talk about, trauma with kind of one person at each table to facilitate. So thank you for that, Dan. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add or ask? Okay.
Well, thanks for the document that they can continue to add to, which
absolutely,
again, is a bonus. You'll get to add more to your arsenal of toolbox. Well, I thank you all very much for coming today. And I love that Oceana is so willing and able to participate in our webinars, as well as all that she does at Coastline. So I wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you so much again for coming, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.
Take care.